You started.
Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I'm Scott Warr, and today's guest is no stranger to Trail Runner Nation. Alex Hutchinson is back. He is a science journalist, a former elite middle distance runner. He's a columnist for Outside Magazine at Sweat Science. And I've been noticing now that you're posting more on LinkedIn, Alex, because I've seen a few posts on LinkedIn. So if you're purely a business person and you still want to enjoy content from Alex, you can go to LinkedIn. He's also the author of one of our favorite books. You'll be seeing a post. Maybe you've seen it before. We're not sure exactly when the episode's coming out. But over the course of the 13 plus years we've done this, we've reviewed 71 books over the last 13 years. And by far, top of the list, one of my favorite books is the book that Alex wrote, Endure, Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance. In fact, we liked it so much, back in 2018, we did 4 episodes around this book. It's that good. If you haven't listened to it, stop the podcast, go get the book, read it, listen to it, however you want to consume it. Well, Alex is finally back with his long-anticipated sequel to Endure called The Explorer's Gene, Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. It's a deep dive into what drives us to seek out the unknown, whether it's an unmarked trail, a new career, or a radical experiment in training. Now, before we get started, I want to put a little question in your mind. This is what you're going to be thinking of on the run today as we're talking to Alex. If your life is already full and things are working, why do so many of us still feel pulled towards the uncertain, the unproven, the uncomfortable? And why does that pull feel even stronger when we lace up our shoes? So that's the thought to keep in your mind as we're listening to this podcast episode today with Alex. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. It's awesome to be back, and thank you for the kind words.
Scott, that was an awesome introduction. I mean, I think that might have been one of your best ever. That was strong.
Should we do a reel just with the intro?
Oh, I think, absolutely.
We were talking with Alex earlier, and it's quite amazing. I should have gone back to see how many times he's been on the podcast, but as I was writing the intro, I thought, isn't it crazy that back in 2018, we read this book, Endure, and we loved it so much, we broke it up into 3 episodes, and then we thought, I wonder if the author would be willing to come on the podcast and talk to us about it. So we reached out to Alex, and he said yes. How lucky are we that he said yes? And then how stupid is he to come back and do some of the silly episodes that we've done? Alex, what makes you make silly decisions like that? Is it the explorer's gene?
I think it's probably a mix of the fact that I have a lot of fun with you guys. I enjoy the conversations. And I was constantly optimistic that I would have another book to promote at some point, and that someday it would all pay off.
You needed some credits in the bank account.
7 years of bad decisions. I kept thinking tomorrow I'll have a book. Tomorrow it will be done. But now it's
Alex,
finally
you're
done.
playing the long game here. This is a long
comes
play.
on the podcast.
It's time to pay the piper. But no, who knows? I may even write another book. Although after this experience, I'm not sure I will. But
well, we hope you do, Alex, because all of them are good. All of them just aren't a reprint or a revision of the last book. It is new thoughts, things that we're curious about and we like to read about and most importantly, talk about. So thanks for doing it. And we hope there's many more books to come.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And I'll keep on coming on as often as you invite me in the hopes that maybe I will write another book.
Alex, so as I was getting into this new book, which is going to be launched on March 28th? 25th.
Yeah.
You can pre-order now.
That's right.
The Endure book, to me, seems like you covered the physical limits that we have in endurance. And it seems like you kind of shifted in this book with the explorer's gene and talked about the psychological part of endurance.
Or another way I would maybe frame it is Endure was all about how we push our limits. And this time I was curious about, or I wanted to understand more about why we push them. Like, okay, it's fine to figure out what's the best way of getting the most out of myself. But the deeper question is, why do I keep doing this to myself? Like, why do I want to go out and run another long race after I just did one? I already know what long races are like. They're hard.
So are we going to address that question and have it answered by the end of the podcast? Is that the promise of TRN's podcast today?
More like I would broaden it and say we'll have the meaning of life kind of sorted out and packaged into a tidy package. So I listeners can look forward to that.
Good.
I should have taken less time on the intro. Maybe this is a longer discussion.
No, it's very simple. Very simple. Run more. I mean, run mass.
At what point after Endure did this thought of looking about the why? How long did it take you to say, okay, no, now how we do it, but why do we do it? When did that thought pop in your mind?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, this idea of being interested in why we want to explore, it's been around in my head for a long time since I was a kid, and why do I always want to go on trips where I'm pretending that I'm discovering stuff? But in a lot of ways, the book took concrete form in the year after Endure came out. Let's say by the time Endure came out in early 2018, and by the end of 2018, it was clear that Endure had been really successful. And I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but it had done better than I expected or than my publisher expected. And it had really kind of cemented the idea that I could be the science of endurance guy for the rest of my life. And that the smart business decision would be to get cracking on Endure 2 Revenge of the Endurance or whatever. Revenge of the Science of Endurance. And for a number of reasons, I ended up deciding not to do that. But probably the most important of those reasons was that it didn't seem all that interesting or fun to me. I'd kind of said everything I had to say about the how of endurance. And at that point, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something different. And so that realization, I think, sparked me to sort of want to understand, why do I want to do something different? I just spent 10 years trying to get to this point where people will think I know stuff about endurance. Why do I want to do something different? What is driving me? And then as I thought about that, I started to connect it to other aspects of my life, like the way I take vacations, going into really trying to get to places where I feel like no one has been before. And then I realized it connected back to the whole running experience itself, to why do I keep doing, I've been running for 30 years now. Like what is it I'm looking for? Why do I still enjoy it? Why do I still feel like it's fresh? What is it what itch am I trying to scratch when I step out the door?
Let's get into you mentioned vacations we take. Let's get into the introduction where you talk about this episode with your family, this vacation you took with your family.
Yeah, so really one of many episodes on family vacations. It's representative of the general genre, which is, so the introduction of the book, I talk about a trip that we took in Newfoundland, I guess 2.5 years ago, on something called the Long Range Track or Traverse, which is a hike through some mountains in Newfoundland that doesn't have a trail. You have to kind of navigate yourself. You pick your route. It's basically the worst weather in the world, awful terrain through like mud and the sort of tuckamore is what it's called, which is this kind of gnarled trees that have been blown by the salt wind into this form that you have to push your way through. And if we took our kids with us, so they were 6 and 8 at the time. So it's just like miserable for them trying to push their way through. Anyway, not to tell the whole story again, but anyway, it was a somewhat miserable vacation in a lot of ways, like black flies and rain and camping in the middle of nowhere. And this is how we take all our vacations. And every year, halfway through the vacation, I'm kind of like, what are we doing? Like, why? What is the point? But by the
Alex,
end, I want to interrupt. Back. Yeah, please.
Have you heard of Disneyland or anything like that? Oh, go ahead.
No. Very expensive to get there from Canada right now.
Okay.
Well, I want to make an input. Disneyland could be worse than what he just described. So keep going, Alex.
For me, I would rather do that hike even if they covered the trail with broken glass, then go spend a week with my kids in Disneyland. But that's just me. Look, it's everyone, different strokes for different folks. But the point is there's, and we have these discussions as a family with my wife, who, like, ever since I met my wife 20 plus years ago, we've been doing challenging backcountry vacations in places where you really have to struggle to get there. But now we have this sort of ethical dilemma of, like, okay, our kids don't really have full autonomy. Are we inflicting something really crazy on them?
Right.
Or are they enjoying it? And we look, we're not sadistic assholes. We're doing our best to make sure it's fun for them. But there is, in any, like, whether it's you go out for a run or you go out for a week-long backpack hike, these sorts of type 2 activities, there's a point in the middle where you're going to struggle no matter what. Like, it's part and parcel of it. And so we have to have these conversations with our kids and face, like, are we asking too much of them? And so trying to answer that question for them or with them, with their input, is a pretty good impetus to start asking it of yourself. It's like, what exactly is it? Why do I want to go backpacking in the mountains, over very tough terrain and sometimes dubious weather with insects and challenges? And it's not an easy question to answer. Like George Mallory, because it's there. It's a bit, this question has been around for a long time, and nobody has a one sentence answer to it, I don't think.
I just want to make a quick editorial here. Ryan, this could be a therapy session for you. Ryan, who's our producer and editor, is my son. And I think that he, as you're describing this trip, I guarantee, at least I was thinking about this trip, backpacking trip that he and my other son and Ryan took up to Penner Lake in a snowstorm, in a blizzard. And he didn't have a lot of fun on that trip. But here's my question. Are we all pre-programmed to have this explorer gene? I mean, obviously your wife has it. Do your kids have it? Is it something that they have innately, or is it something you're teaching them? So the whole nature nurture conversation.
Yeah, this is, so when I ended up sitting down to write the book and I wanted, why do we do this? Why do this? I ended up realizing, well, I'm making some assumptions here that this is a human, a human trait, and that actually I should step back and try to ask the question that you're asking right now, which is, well, is this just a subset of idiots who have this trait, or is this a is this a human inheritance? And so I guess my overall take would be that we are all wired in a way that predisposes us to value and perhaps overvalue novelty and uncertainty, and that this is something that and the reason we are all wired this way is that as a species, having the desire to find out what's over the next horizon, as a species and as individuals, is good. It leads to better things. We discover better ways of doing things. We discover better places to live. We discover new ideas and so on. So our sort of history as a species has left us with a pattern such that if you, let's say, take millions of orders from a food delivery company and try and assess, how do people decide what meal I'm going to order next? You find that if you hold everything else equal, if you've got two choices which are the same rating, same price, same type of food, people are inclined to pick the one that they haven't tried before. Or even if they haven't tried either of them, they're inclined to pick the one with fewer reviews, which is paradoxical. It's surprising to me.
Wow.
That there's something about, well, we don't know whether that one might actually be amazing. It might be terrible because it has few reviews, but that one has a chance of being amazing. So we are all wired in this way, but there's no doubt that the degree to which we're wired that way varies widely. So some people have a much stronger attraction to uncertainty and the unknown. And then also it manifests in different ways. So some people may have a really strong desire to explore the unknown, but zero interest in backpacking or running. But they may be, atonal 20th century classical musical composers who are drawn to uncertainty in a different way aspect of their life. So there's different dimensions that we can be exploratory on.
And I've got to think, Alex, that there has to be a nice distribution of those that are explorers and those that are not, that are homebodies, that say, you know what, I'm not going on that trek. I'm going to stay here And probably by design, we need some homebodies to stay there so we don't lose the species. So the DNA survives. Maybe these guys are going on a trip that nobody's going to make it.
Yeah.
So we still have another shot at it.
Yes.
So how do we know? If I looked in the mirror, how do I know if I'm the homebody or I'm the person that's going to move forward? If somebody's listening to this, are they thinking, I wonder if I have that explorer gene? How would we know?
So let me answer that in an indirect way, which is,
Yeah,
first of all,
because it was an indirect question. It was a poorly asked question.
7 questions. So I'm going to give you 7 answers, whether you like it or not.
Good.
First of all, yeah, there's not one right way to be. There are a lot of different ways to be, and we are better as a whole when people are in different ways. So I had some interesting discussions about this with genetics researchers, and one of them was explaining to me this idea of frequency-dependent selection. Some things become more or less useful depending on whether other people are already like that. So there are some traits that evolve to. There is one kind of optimal setting. So height is an example where the vast majority of us are within a fairly tight range of height. There are not a lot of people who are 2 feet tall. There are not a lot of people who are 11 feet tall, because there is an optimal for the human form. There are other traits like introversion and extroversion, or like aggression and passivity, or like exploring versus not being exploring, where as a whole, you want your group, your tribe, your society to have a mix of people. And it's really valuable to have some people pushing the frontier and some people guarding the home fires. And there's research both historically, but also even in current or modern day hunter-gatherer groups, where some people are hunter-gatherers and some are agriculturalists. And it's like the most valuable set of genes depends on what you're doing and what the people around you are doing. So it is absolutely valuable, and there's not one right way to be. Now, the question is, how do you know question 7, I think it was how do you know what you are? And I will say this, writing a book about this idea of an explorer's gene, and I got into some specific genes. There's one related to a dopamine receptor called DRD4. I had to ask myself, well, I'm writing a book. Should I fork out $100 and figure out what my genotype is, whether I have the explorer's gene, and then I get a chapter out of that, and then I write off the expense as a business expense? And I decided not to. I decided I actually actively don't want to know what my gene is. I don't want to feel like when I have the pull to go on some vacation or to try some new food, oh, I'm responding to my genes, or oh, I'm fighting against my genes, even though my genes. Yes, I just want to do what I want to do. And so my advice would be don't worry too much about what your specific genotype is, because there isn't just one gene. There's a lot of genes. Those genes all contribute in different ways, and we also have like the nurture aspect, how we were brought up, what we were taught to value. So someone may be very exploratory, like I was saying before, in the outdoor physical context, or someone else might be exploratory in the intellectual context. That doesn't necessarily reflect their genes. It may reflect that as kids they were told there's nothing greater than writing a really original piano sonata or something like that. So I think people should tune into what they want to do without worrying too much about what their genes think they're supposed to do.
I love that, and I think I fall in the same camp. I don't want to know what my genes say about me, whether I'm an explorer or not. I would like to think that I fall in that explorer camp. What about you, Don? Would you, if you could take a test right now to tell you whether you have that gene, would you want to know?
My genes tell me that I need to do some exploring because they're getting a bit tight. That's what my genes say, Scott.
Hey, Alex, I love that you mix in all your books, not only the science, but some stories that kind of reinforce or maybe ask questions. And in chapter 1, you talked about the Polynesian culture. And I found the chapter quite fascinating. I don't know whether I really thought about it as well as you did as you were writing the book, that here are these Polynesians on these tiny little islands, and they go and chop down a tree and hollow it out into a really tiny canoe-like thing with an outrigger. And they look out into the vastness of the ocean and say, I'm going to go out there, with no idea of what's going to happen. Tell us a little bit about what you found out as you're researching that and writing the book, how these Polynesians are just crazy explorers.
Yeah, this was. I found this really fascinating too, and I had to fight with my editor about it. He's like, "I think you're getting a little too deep in this. Isn't a book about the Polynesians?" I'm like, "Dude, I spent like a year and a half researching it. I have to put at least one chapter in." So this goes back to this idea of trying to understand what are we? Are humans different? Like, are we wired in some way that we search for the unknown? And there's this whole history of how humans spread out across the globe in a very rapid manner, unlike other closely related species. And you can argue about, like, is that any different than the seeds of a tree being carried by a bird? Did we just spread out sort of like a glass of wine spilling on the table or whatever, or were we like actively seeking it out? And when you ask that question, you soon come to the question of water crossings as a sort of a litmus test of like, all right, like it's possible that people just kind of wandered over the tens of thousands of years from A to B. But it becomes very difficult to say that, yeah, we just sort of wandered to Easter Island. Someone put up a shack that was a little too close to mine. I felt like it was getting a little crowded over here in Tahiti. So I sailed like 2,000 miles over the open ocean on a stick to get to Easter Island. So now I should say, my books, as we have this conversation, we're like less than a week before the book comes out. Some jerks just published a study showing that iguanas rafted 5,000 miles to, I think it was Fiji, hundreds of thousands of years ago, or maybe it was millions of years ago. That the way that iguanas got to Fiji was by floating on vegetation. So it does show that crazy things can happen without foresight or without intention. But the overall picture of settling, for example, Polynesia, like getting to Easter Island, or even getting to Australia. Getting to Australia is sometimes considered the sort of first ironclad proof that humans were like behaving in a modern way, because there was enough of a water barrier that you had to be like, you weren't just drifting. You were like, let's find out what's over there we can't see. Let's deliberately set out. And so getting back to what you were saying, this idea of the intention of so it's an imaginative leap to say, I don't even know what's over the horizon, but I can imagine there might be something that would be fun, that would be great, that would be better than where I am right now. Let's find out.
Wow.
And you can do these like they did even back in the 60s, they did these advanced computer simulations of the drift patterns and the wind patterns. Say, could Polynesia have been settled just by like people getting blown off course or drifting or being banished from one island and having to? And the answer was basically no. You cannot get to all the islands in Polynesia unless you deliberately set out in a direction where there's nothing, where as far as you can tell, there's nothing but open ocean, and you set out and just try and figure out what's going to be, a week of sailing into the open ocean to see if you're going to find anything.
That's crazy. I love that.
I don't know if I love it. I think I agree with you. It's crazy. It's insane. You have no idea if there's anything out there, and your supply ship that's trailing you isn't even there. You don't have supplies. You're just going that direction, and just maybe they were banished. Maybe they were prisoners, and they say, we either lop off your head or you get on this ship and you just row.
And if
and
we
just
see you
go
again, you're in trouble. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
maybe that. What was the impetus? What created these people to take that chance?
Yeah.
I just
Especially they're living on a small little island. They know every square foot of that thing. They're comfortable. They know how to eat. They know that's crazy.
And I will say, like, these voyages of exploration, because I think the evidence is strong enough to say that, yeah, that's what these were. These were like someone setting out to try and discover something. So there's a critique of exploration studies that's like, yeah, we all focus on Christopher Columbus and Lewis and Clark and all these white European guys. And there have been other great voyages. And I think that's true. Now, the reason Christopher Columbus and Lewis and Clark are interesting is that we have journals from these guys. So we can actually reconstruct what that voyage is like. We will never know what the first voyage to Easter Island was like, who did it, why they did it, what dramas they had en route. But we can infer that whatever the story was, it was probably a pretty amazing one.
So I'm thinking here about this, and boy, I have a lot of thoughts going. I'm making a big life-changing decision right now that I'm weighing, and one side of the solution is something that would be very comfortable, something that I'm used to, and the other one would be way out of my comfort zone. So I'm thinking of that as we're discussing this. But the other thing that I'm thinking about here is, in today's society, is there truly an opportunity for us to explore the unknown? So let's take, for example, a 50-mile run or a 100-mile run. We know that it may be something that would explore our own capabilities, but we already know thousands of people have done this and not died. And so is that truly exploring the unknown when you know there's examples of other people? Well, the first thing I did when I wanted to run a long distance, I found people that did it and helped me understand how I could do it. Versus the Polynesians, the first time somebody rode off the island on a stick, they had no proof that they would live.
Yeah, this is something I wrestled with a lot, and that I sort of wrestled with on my vacations again, where I spent considerable effort getting to places where I can kind of pretend that no one's been there. You know, I've gone pretty deep in the wilderness, but the truth is, nowhere I've gone does not have a guidebook written about it. Like not only have people been there, people have written a book saying, yeah, if you want to go there, here's the guy who operates the float plane, and here, you know, people have travel blogs about everything now. So again, in the exploration literature, there's this idea of firsting. Like, is exploration all about being the first to do something? And, you know, one critique of, or one analysis is like, even for someone like Christopher Columbus, if you read his journals in the original Portuguese, I guess it was, Spanish, I don't even know what he wrote his journals in. And I've certainly never read them in the initial languages. Anyway, whatever original language he wrote his in, he does not make the claim of like, I'm the first to see this place, because he thought he was in India. So he's like, I am seeing this place. I am observing this place. And at least in this analysis that I read on firsting, it's like the firsting thing was applied kind of retroactively once they realized there was a bunch of gold there. And then it became about discovery rather than like absolute discovery. He's the first person to get there, even though there were a bunch of people there already. But so anyway, the idea is firsting really the be all and end all of exploring? And this came up again. There's a guy named Adam Schultz who's a Canadian sort of adventurer and writer whose work I really like. He's a canoeist, and he made headlines about a decade ago for being the first to travel down this really obscure river in northern Canada called the Again River. And, you know, he had searched through all the explorers' logs and all the surveying stuff, and he's like, no one's canoed down this river. And he canoed down it, and it's only been mapped by satellite mapping. So he canoed down it, and he went over a waterfall by accident. He's like, yes, this proves that I was the first one. No one knew there was a waterfall here because no one had actually been down it. And he got a lot of criticism because people are like, dude, like, the First Nations people have been there for millennia, even though there's no record. Someone went down that river. It's like, stop being obsessed about it. And I thought about this a lot, because this is sort of gets to the heart of like, am I just playing a big game of pretending I'm the first to do something, or is my enjoyment of exploration, does it reflect something else other than being the first or pretending to be the first to do something? And my conclusion, which maybe is a little bit convenient, is that you don't have to be the first to do something for exploration to be valuable. I mean, fundamentally, look, obviously there have been situations in history where people really are the first to do something. And that, you know, we're exploring outer space, we're exploring deep under the ocean, we're exploring new ideas and so on. But most of us don't have the luxury or the opportunity of saying, no human has ever done what I'm about to do. But I think exploring our own limits, exploring our capacities, learning what our response or our contribution to a given topic will be, that's still pretty valuable and pretty empowering. So I guess I would say, let's not be dismissive of finding out about our own capabilities and finding out about our own responses to a new environment or whatever.
that explorer may not have been the first to go down that river, but he was the first to survive the waterfall.
That's right. All those bones he saw at the bottom, in the pool at the bottom, those people didn't live to tell the tale. So what
That's it. So he was a firster. And
he reported on it. And, it's like, part of his argument was like, I don't know if someone went down this 10,000 years ago, but whatever, there's no information. So part of, when we talk about what's the draw to novelty, what's the draw to uncertainty or to the unknown, the reason we're wired to be attracted to that is not because it's great for the human species to not know what the hell's going on. It's great for the human species to learn something new. So uncertainty is just a convenient proxy for opportunities to learn. And so this guy going over the waterfall, maybe someone else went over it before, but that person hasn't reported it. Humans don't know about that. So as far as we're concerned, for the 8 billion people on the earth today, nobody knew about that river. So his being attracted to the uncertainty of going down this river gave us new information. Probably not particularly useful information, but it's like, it's not about whether someone has seen it. It's about whether we have something new to learn about it. And however many people have run 100 miles before, that has no bearing on answering the question of whether you're capable, or has very little bearing.
Right.
We still don't know whether you're going to drop dead at 85 miles.
Good point. There's personal exploration too that needs to be done, or the curiosity to push us to find our own personal limits. So there's a chance for all of us to be, personal explorers. I like that thought. I had a thought about, I wondered about this guy going down this river and being the first to do it. Was it like the 4-minute mile? After Roger Bannister did that and then others came behind him, did people start to move down this river and explore it and repeat what this person found out? Do you know anything about that?
So the guy's name is Adam Schultz. He wrote a book called Alone Against the North, which describes this expedition. And if you read this book, you will understand why, as far as I know, no one has ever returned to this river. It sounds absolutely miserable. Like, to get there, there's no lake where you can take a float plane in. There's no road. There's no nothing. So he had to literally drag his canoe for miles and miles and miles. Like, he had to paddle a long way and then drag his canoe through the tundra. This is the Hudson's Bay lowlands, which has the highest concentration of blood-sucking insects in the world. And he has to drag his canoe through undergrowth for miles before he can even get to the river to paddle it. So the reason no one has paddled it is because you'd have to be an insane fool to want to paddle it. So that's kind of the nature of exploring today, right? Like, everybody's run a 5K, but only insane fools are running 100 miles. You have to do something out of the ordinary. No offense to your listeners, of course, but you have to, and to you guys. But yeah, like, this was not like the 4-minute mile, because everyone was like, wow, that was a crazy thing to do.
So you mentioned earlier about the neuroscience and some of the dopamine and things like that. I'm curious, as I'm trying to evaluate my own motivation, is doing something where you're exploring, is it the act of exploring, the journey, that dopamine rush, is that the reason we do it? Or is it the result, the reward at the end that we do it for?
The chicken or the egg?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I to go back to a point that I kind of made peripherally earlier, I think you can answer the question of, like, why are we drawn to the unknown? You can answer it in two ways. One is that because having a drive to explore leads us to learn new things about the world, which lead us to better and better outcomes. So in the end, we get good stuff out of it. So we're drawn to exploring for instrumental aims of the better outcome. And then the other way to answer it is to say, because it feels good, because it's interesting, because it's engaging, because it makes my life feel meaningful. And so I'm going to do these things because, win or lose, I'm going to being engaged on this quest, this attempt to find out something new is going to be fun, even no matter how it turns out. And so those two seem like really different ways of answering, which is what you're asking.
Yeah.
I would say in the past, those two things were tied together. The reason it feels good and feels meaningful is because we've evolved, because people who liked to explore and do hard things ended up doing well in life and passing on their genes. So we are wired to enjoy the experience of exploring because it's good, because it produces good outcomes. But that doesn't mean those always stay together. And the analogy I would make is to like the sweet taste of sugar. Sugar tastes good to us because it's a good source of calories. So enjoying that taste has led us to have a drive to experience that taste. In the modern world, the feeling good and the good outcome of getting calories can get sort of decoupled, where we may not need any more calories and we may nonetheless desire a fourth helping of dessert. And so we've had to sort of step in and say, okay, even though evolutionarily pursuing sweet at all costs was great because I needed calories, in the modern world, I need to say, you know what? Even though the fourth helping of dessert would taste good, it's not going to be good for me. So in the exploring context, to come back eventually, finally to the point, the feeling of pursuing novelty is great, but it can be hijacked by different in different ways by the modern world. And this sort of the easy example would be like social media. It's like as I scroll, I keep getting the illusion that I'm discovering something new. It's hijacking that novelty circuitry, but it's not teaching me anything about the world, at least not anything worth knowing. And so after an hour of mindlessly scrolling social media, which happens, very easily by accident, it's like a time warp. And you're like, what did I just do? I seldom feel it's like, yeah, that was I really learned some new things about, what I would do in a street fight or whatever. And these are not useful lessons. And so to come back to your dilemma of like, how should I be making a decision here? I think it's fine to do things because they feel engaging and interesting. And in fact, I think that's probably the best reason to do things rather than, and so when I've thought of big life decisions, like deciding to leave physics and go into journalism or even deciding to write this new book, it's like, I wanted to make sure this is something that's going to be worthwhile no matter how it turns out. Even if I don't make it where I want to go, I think the journey is going to be fun. So I put that first, but I also say, is there the potential of getting something good out of it? Is this a useful goal to be pursuing, or is this purely, I guess it's family past podcast, but is this purely masturbatory? Am I just doing it because it feels good? And if that's the case, then I would say maybe that's not as good a motivation.
So the next obvious question is, can we overdo it? Can we get so obsessed with this explorer gene and having that rush of doing it that the results or the end game is destructive?
I think so. Yeah. And I will say, when I started out thinking about this topic, I thought I'd end up writing a book where the subtitle was like "The Case for Exploring More," or "Why You Should Make More Room for Exploration in Your Life." And as time went on, and as I got sort of deeper into the research on this, I was like, yeah, no, exploring more isn't always the right answer. Sometimes it's actually exactly the wrong answer.
Hey, Don, is someone vacuuming?
Yeah. So sometimes exploring more isn't always the right answer. And sometimes it leads you astray. And so a simple example that I would give is listening to music. So
yeah,
we tend to be most exploratory when we're young. And there's lots of research showing that like the music we hear in our late teens and early 20s is the music that we like the most. And as time goes on, we get less and less exploratory. We stop listening to new music. And you can push back against that and say, that's kind of too bad, because I'm 49 years old. If I don't ever listen to any new music, and if my health stays good, which I hope it will, I may have another 40 years where I'm just like listening to the same old stuff. And I could have been, discovering something new that I like. I still have 40 years to enjoy it. So I should keep exploring new music. But you can obviously push that to extremes. And the ultimate extreme would be like, I'm going to be so exploratory in music that I never listen to the same thing twice. I will only listen to every song once because I'm all about novelty. I'm all about pushing my limits. And it's like, but we could see that on the face of it, that's absurd. That it would be a tragedy if every time I heard a new song, like, I really love this song, I wish I could hear it again, but I'm never going to listen to it again because I have to keep exploring. And I think we can make an analogy then to, the way we pursue running goals, the way we pursue career goals, the way, if you're always just asking yourself, what is the next thing? And you never stop to enjoy the thing that you just spent the last month or year or decade pursuing, that's obviously a bit of a shame. So I do think it's a balance. And so I've ended up, there's this phrase or this concept of the explore exploit dilemma. Should you exploit the stuff what you already know, or should you explore something new and unfamiliar? It's a dilemma because both of them have value. It would be an easy dilemma to solve. It was like, the answer is always explore more, always take the thing that you don't know about.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've talked about on the podcast a number of times this Japanese practice of misogi, where you set this just audacious goal, something that is extremely difficult and outside your comfort range, where the likelihood of you successfully completing the challenge is really low, but there's also a very low likelihood that you're going to die. And you don't do that every weekend. You do it maybe once a year or twice a year. And so you have the balance. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you, that there needs to be a balance.
Yeah. Like I was doing an interview recently with on a podcast called Emerging Form, which is about the creative process, a really interesting podcast. So they were asking me about my, do I have any rituals for getting in the zone to writing good stuff? And I'm like, every day I need to go for my run, and I need to have some time lying on the sofa. And it's like, those are the yin and yang, right? Like it's not all pushing myself. Like, so I think balance in the sense of, like, sometimes you want to be, physically moving. Sometimes you want to be relaxing. Sometimes you want to be engaged in intellectually challenging pursuits. Sometimes you want to revisit something that's fun and interesting and comforting. So yeah, absolutely. I think balance is a generally good principle.
Well, go ahead, Scott, because I may be derailing. I have another topic.
Okay. I was just going to ask him, going back to this family vacation that you did. I'm curious if you take away the experience or the benefit of exploring by planning too much. So, for example, let's say someone is going to go run the Leadville 100 race. It's the first time that they're going there, and there's hundreds, if not there's thousands of people that have run this before. There's forums out there, there's coaches out there, and they take, get the elevation profile, and they plan it out, and they spreadsheet it out, and they have a plan and everything. Does that disrupt this whole idea and the benefit of exploring? So when you took your family and 2 kids that you forced to go on this trip, did you over-plan it, or did you under-plan it with intention to get the full benefit of the experience?
Yeah, so this is a big dilemma, something we've wrestled with a bunch, because, like I said, we go on pretty obscure vacations, but people have been there. And if you look hard enough, someone's travel blog has reported it.
Right.
And so
both
my wife and I are cautious and risk averse, and even more so when we're dragging our kids around. And so it is really useful to know if, like, yeah, we might need crampons in this section, or, or, there's a creek crossing that is very deep and fast. It could be deep and fast, and that, you might lose a few kids in. There are things where you really kind of want to know, but at the same time, and so both my wife and I are pretty rigorous planners. You do enough planning, and you've seen pictures of every scenic spot on the hike, and so you're totally robbed of that feeling of coming around the corner. And you come around the corner, and it's like, oh my God, did you see that? Look at that waterfall. Instead, it's like, oh, here's the waterfall that we saw that picture of, and that's a different experience. So I'm definitely not of the school of, hey, let's just wing it and we'll que sera, and we'll come through it. I plan and prepare, but in last summer, so 2 years after the Newfoundland hike, we did a hut-to-hut hike in the Pyrenees in Spain, and pretty challenging still. And I was really, there was kind of a fortuitous thing in that both my wife and I were slammed at work in the weeks and months leading up to this. I was trying to write this stupid book, and So we got out on the hike and we were like looking at each other and it's like, what's this? What's today's stage like? And I'm like, I don't know. I know it's like 17 kilometers. That's about all I know. And so it was fun in that way. We still had GPS tracks if we needed them and stuff, and we had a map. But there was a kind of liberating feeling of not being like, okay, now we know the next section, as you said, the grade is this point. Now, if you're trying to set a personal best or do particularly well at the Leadville 100, the balance shifts to like, yeah, it's foreknowledge. You don't want to be caught by surprise. But if your goal is to go on a vacation and have fun, then yeah, I think you can make a case for maybe being a little less obsessive in the planning.
You know, I would be interested in meeting your wife. You hit the lottery when you married this lady, because I don't know how many people would put up with this explorer gene and be enthusiastic about it and be supportive and maybe being maybe the leader of the group. I don't even know. Maybe she's 2x explorer than even you.
Well, and one of the stories I briefly mentioned in the book is when I met my wife, we were living in different cities, and we were both from Toronto, so we went on our first date when we were both back home over Christmas one year, and then we each visited each other once. So we'd been on like basically 3 dates, and we went on a backpacking trip in the Rockies, and we were going to go in Jasper or Banff. But then my cousin told me about this place that's north of Jasper that's really hard to get to, doesn't have any actual trails. It's just like a wilderness area. And we spent 10 days hiking in there. It was a real baptism by fire for our relationship. But what I certainly learned was that Lauren would be the one pushing me. And I remember, we were doing these crazy hikes and she'd be like, come on. And I was like, wow, this is, like you said, I hit the jackpot because she's physically capable of doing pretty hard trips, but she also is really interested in and enjoys the experience in the same way that I do.
So I've got a question about the explorer, and maybe you've thought about it. Do you think the explorer is doing it for personal gains and satisfaction, or maybe for the next generation?
Mm.
Do you think they're looking to explore to make things better for the next, or are they selfishly doing it for themselves?
Huh.
I'm sure there's a diversity of motivations, but if I had to place my money in one column, I would say most explorers are doing it for themselves. And the question then is, are they doing it for themselves to get rich or to be famous, or are they doing it for themselves because it just is interesting and they're compelled to by their curiosity? And I think in that case, there's a mix, but I think I think if you want to provide for future generations of your own family, you should probably be an accountant. Have a secure, and I don't mean that dismissively, but have a secure way of building up money and exploring by definition always carries that risk of failure. I mean, if there's no risk of failure, it wouldn't be exploring. So I feel like the compulsion to get out and discover new things has to play a big role rather than just rational risk-benefit calculations.
Yeah, I think when the Polynesian community got on that stick and headed towards Nowheresville, that it'd be hard to convince someone, I'm doing this for my family. It's like, dude, really? I think you're leaving your family.
Yeah, or even for the future, because it's like what you're, the chance that there's going to be a future beyond like a week from Tuesday seems pretty slim.
Later in the book, you talked about the idea of play and explain how that chapter came about as you're talking about exploring. Is exploring a type of play? Should it be fun?
Yeah. So, okay. It's interesting you framed it that way as, how did that chapter come about? Because the reason is I was trying to understand exploring, and I came across a line of research that makes a connection between play and exploring, which is basically that exploring is what we're doing when we're exploring is we're seeking out areas of uncertainty, seeking out paths that we don't know where they lead, in order to have the pleasure essentially of finding out where they lead, of resolving that uncertainty and discovering it. And so in this argument, play is fundamentally about constructing your own rules to create sources of uncertainty that you then have the pleasure of resolving. You don't have to find a river that no one has paddled down. You just have to set up a game where you don't know what's going to happen. And so there's a guy in Denmark named Mark Malmdorf Andersen who's done I had a really interesting conversation with him about this. And, one of the examples he gave is like, you take kids to a playground and they'll be like, wow, what's it going to be like to go down that slide? And they'll go run and climb up and go down the slide 3 times. Now they know what it's like to go. So the intrinsic act of going down the slide is not really all that fun. I mean, it's not terrible, but after a few times they've gone, they know what it's like. So now they're like, I wonder what it's like to go up the slide. And you'll be like, don't go up the slide. There's 6 kids waiting to go down. But they're like, I don't want to go down the slide. The slide is going down the slide. I already know what going down. Like, you idiot. I already know what this is. I need to find out something new. So and when kids create imaginary games or whatever, they're fundamentally trying to create situations where they can have the feeling of exploring, where the rules are designed to make sure that the outcome is unknown. The definition of a bad game is one where you know how it's going to turn out.
As you're talking about that, I'm thinking of a weekly trail run in our area. I've never been invited. Don has not invited me to this, nor neither have the other runners. So I've never done it. It's called The Hunt. And it's a bunch of local runners, and one person is in charge of leading. And it's, a distance, what is it, like 3 to 5, 6 miles or something
Alex,
like that, right?
Do you notice about a run that he's never been on? He's taking the role of explaining to us how it goes. Go ahead, Scott, finish up.
Well, it's because Don talks about it all the time, and I'm sitting there going, well, how come I've never been invited? But anyway, the precipice is there's a leader, and you have to follow the leader. And it's on trails that everyone knows, or at least you think you know, the normal routes. But that leader then takes you on a circuitous route that maybe you've never taken before. And it's kind of like exploring, but you're following a leader that knows where they're going. And so that's the first thing. And then I'm thinking there's actually some fun when Don and I go run our normal loop that we do on Saturday mornings. Sometimes it's fun to say, hey, we've never been down that trail. Let's go take that trail. Well, we have a certain amount of time. We can't, maybe we shouldn't take that trail. Who cares? Let's just go do it anyway. And there's some play and some fun and maybe there's a short dopamine rush. And I just think that that's really cool. I think that we don't have to climb Mount Everest to feed that explorer gene. It could be something as easy as, I'm going to run the route I normally run every day, reverse, or I'm going to take this new route or doing something like that. So it could be just a simple change.
So a couple of things in response. First of all, this idea of like following the leader, it reminds me of a workout we would sometimes do when I was in college with the cross-country team, where the workout would be, okay, everyone get a number. We're going to take turns. One person leads. And when it's your turn to lead, so it's like a fartlek workout or an interval workout, but basically when it's your turn to lead, you decide when to start, you decide where to go, you decide how fast to run, you decide when to stop. Nobody else knows. So you're behind them running. You don't know how long the interval is going to last, where they're going to go, whether they're going to accelerate. And then it stops and you're jogging along recovering. You don't know how much rest you have. You don't know when the next guy is going to decide to start. So the long distance guys would be 10 seconds later, they're like, okay, I'm going. Whereas the middle distance guys would be like, oh, let's take 5 minutes of jogging. So anyway, those workouts were so much fun. The physiology was the same. We were getting an interval workout in, but we were, the play was injected because of the uncertainty, because we didn't know. Now, the second thing I wanted to say is this idea of turning it into a game. So let me go back to Adam Schultz, the canoe guy who was going down the Again River. And he got a lot of criticism for this claim that I was the first to, people called him like a neo-colonialist or something like that. Now, he's written a bunch of books since then several books about incredible, amazing, ridiculous canoe journeys he's taken. One of them was going across the Arctic from west to east. And the reason canoeing across the Arctic from west to east is crazy is because virtually all the rivers run north to south because they're emptying in the river. So basically, he was dragging his canoe across the Arctic, and then he would like pull the canoe upstream for a little ways, and then drag for another 50 miles across the Arctic, and then paddle downstream for. The reason no one has done that voyage is because it's nonsensical. It's not a useful travel route. And his book after that was paddling from his home to the Arctic, which again was not a like traditional travel route. So I look at this and I compare it to, there's a famous definition of playing games from a philosopher named Bernard Suits, which is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. So when you're canoeing down a new river, you're like, well, I'm discovering things. This is really important. We need to know if there's a waterfall in this river. When you're canoeing west to east across the Arctic, that's a voluntary attempt to overcome completely unnecessary obstacles. So this explorer, I would classify him as one of the great explorers of the modern age. He's playing games. And that's what virtually all explorers are. So if someone goes to Mars, I'll call them an explorer who's not playing games. They're actually trying to discover. But for the most part, even the most extreme explorers in the modern world, they're fundamentally playing games. And that's something that we can all do in our own spheres at our own levels, on our own runs, is find ways of finding the fun and the uncertainty and injecting some of that into it.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting conversation because, we don't have to be Adam Schultz and take it to that extreme. But I've got to think that just in the human nature, there's a bit of exploring in everyday's activity and in all decisions, whether it's, a sporting event. You don't know how that's going to come out. So you're exploring that experience. Maybe going to a movie or a different restaurant or maybe a different route to work to explore how that might go. I imagine there's a lot of exploration wrapped up in everyday decisions.
Yeah.
Or maybe trying a new cuisine, Don. Maybe trying something new in your food choices.
There's different.
Do you think that could be exploring?
There's different categories. I'm a homebody. I stick with what's safe. I'm going to be around. My DNA is going to move forward. Yours, after you eat that, whatever you eat, you're done.
There we go. These decisions are everywhere. I did have to kind of wrestle with this. Like, how am I going to define exploring? Because can we really say that if you're watching TV and you decide to change the channel, you are an explorer? You're deciding, I want to know what's on the next channel over. Like, so there's a point at which it branches off into absurdity. But as long as there's some stakes, at play, I think, yeah, like fundamentally we're talking about the same things. As far as our brains are concerned, the way we map new places is in the same part of the brain, the hippocampus, as where we map new ideas and new experiences. And where we map how they relate to what we already know. So I absolutely think like the classic example is the restaurant. Like, do you order the same thing you always order, or do you try something new? Everybody makes different decisions, Don. Like we understand your choices, but those are one more opportunity to try new things or in other ways of parts of your life.
And I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it selfishly, Scott. I'm doing it for generations that are in front of me, eating sensible items.
I would say I'm going to open the curtain a little bit and talk about my friend Don a little bit, because he's a paradox, because he is not the guy that makes the spreadsheet. He'll go run 100-mile race and not know, where the starting line is or what time it starts or how to get his rental car from the start to the finish. He doesn't think about that.
Guilty.
And so there's that side of him. And then there's the side of him that I want to take him to this really nice restaurant in Austin to have the best Chinese dumplings that are rated in the entire country. And he says, I'm not eating that. So there's kind of a paradox to Don Freeman.
But I think Don Freeman is representative of the human condition here, which is that none of us or very few of us at least, are all one way or all another way. And I think this is something to keep in mind for people who are like, I have zero interest in parasailing to the South Pole. That's not me. I'm not an explorer. And I have a lot of, because I've been writing a book on exploring, I've had a lot of sort of, cocktail party conversations where it's like, oh, exploring. Well, I'm not an explorer. I hate that crap. And I would, okay, no, thanks. That's that's really encouraging. But I would argue that most people, if you push them far enough, you will find areas in which they are exploratory, and it may be not the traditional pushing my physical limits or getting lost in a new city or whatever. But people find ways in different aspects of their life, whether that's failing to plan for how to get your rental car to the finish line or whatever. There are lots of ways to explore, and so people should not feel that they have to all conform to Scott's directions.
Ideal.
That's right.
Hey, Alex, congratulations on this book. I'm curious, because I've never written a book. Is it harder to write the book or the title?
Maybe 50-50.
Well, Endure, the title was longer than the book, to be fair.
Yeah. There's a lot of brainstorming that goes into it. And so with Endure, I spent, like, I don't even know how many days and weeks sorting out a title. And then my publisher was like, yeah, no, that's not going to cut it. We're going to call it Endure. we're calling it Endure, and, quit your moaning and wailing because that's final. I'm like, oh, okay. And then in hindsight, I'm like, oh, Endure, that was a great title. I'm glad I thought of it. This one, actually, I came up at long length with the Explorer's Gene, and I submitted the book proposal under that title. And then I got a book deal, and I was like, oh, by the way, I don't intend to actually call it the Explorer's Gene. That would be terrible. We're not calling it that. Like, don't worry, I've got 68 other ideas that I'll run by you. And they're like, no, we're happy with Explorer's Gene. We're going, like, what? I thought I'd get another chance. So, yeah, and the subtitles, of course, are, we're paid by the words. So the longer the subtitle, the more money you make. So you got to do what you got to do.
So the words are the words in the title are also included in the pay package.
Right. You get double pay. So the more adjectives, the better.
That's funny. Well, the book is already out because we're going to be. I think we may be releasing Ryan this next week on whatever that is. It's after the book comes out. So if you're listening to this, go out and get the book. It's at all your favorite book sellers, whether that's brick and mortar or online. I assume there'll be an audio version as well.
There is indeed an audio version. I've even heard clips from it. It's something.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you so much, Alex. You're always just a joy to talk to. Check him out on LinkedIn because he's now active on LinkedIn, but you can also find him at Outside Online, Sweat Science. You can follow him on Instagram and Twitters, and I guess it's not Twitter, X's or whatever you call it now. Are you on OnlyFans yet, Alex?
Come on, Scott.
Only on Cameo. Yeah. I can give race split recommendations on Cameo. Yeah.
So put on your explorer hat and go out and run.
Moss.